If I asked you who the best math student in your school is, you'd probably imagine someone who solves impossible-looking questions in seconds. Someone who seems naturally gifted. Someone whose brain just works differently. But what if that's completely wrong? Because when researchers and top performers are studied closely, a strange pattern appears. The students who become exceptional at math aren't usually the ones born with some magical talent. They're the ones who train differently. In fact, many students spend years doing hundreds of questions, memorizing formulas, and grinding through worksheets only to stay stuck at the same level. Meanwhile, another student solves fewer questions, yet improves twice as fast. So what's the difference? Why do some students reach a level where math feels almost effortless, while others struggle despite working hard? The answer comes down to 7 habits. 7 ways of thinking and learning that separate average students from the ones who become genuinely elite. Imagine trying to build a skyscraper on a weak foundation. No matter how impressive the upper floors look, cracks eventually start to appear. That's exactly what happens in math. Students think they're struggling with difficult topics like calculus, trigonometry, or advanced algebra. But when they get stuck, the real problem is often hiding somewhere much deeper. A forgotten fraction rule, weak arithmetic, confusion with percentages, small gaps that seemed harmless years ago. That's why top math students don't rush to learn harder topics. They obsess over making the basics effortless. When they see fractions, they don't need extra thinking time. When they simplify expressions, it feels automatic. Their brain isn't wasting energy on basic calculations, so it can focus entirely on solving the actual problem. Ask yourself a simple question. What basic skill am I still hesitating on? Because mastering the fundamentals is the shortcut. Now here's something that sounds obvious, but most students ignore. Math is not a subject you learn, it's a skill you train. Think about it. If someone wanted to become great at football, would they learn about football all week and only practice once before a match? Of course not. Yet that's exactly how many students approach math. They watch lessons, understand the explanation, and feel confident. But when it's time to solve problems on their own, they get stuck. Why? Because understanding a solution is not the same as creating one. The students who become exceptional at math have a simple advantage: they solve problems every day. Even 30 minutes can be enough. That daily practice helps your brain recognize patterns, spot shortcuts, and build confidence. Questions that once felt impossible start feeling familiar. Most students rely on intensity. They cram before exams. Top students rely on consistency. Because in math, a little practice every day beats a lot of practice once in a while. Have you ever memorized a formula perfectly? Walked into an exam feeling confident, and then completely forgotten how to use it? Most students think the solution is simple: memorize more. But that's exactly where they go wrong. The best math students don't just ask, "What's the formula?" They ask, "Why does this work?" Because when you understand the logic behind a concept, you no longer have to rely on memory alone. Even if you forget the formula, you can often rebuild it from understanding. Think about it: which is easier, remembering hundreds of disconnected rules or understanding the small number of ideas that connect them all? That's why top students constantly ask questions. Where did this formula come from? When should I use it? The moment you stop treating math as facts to memorize and start treating it as puzzles to understand, everything changes. Because people who memorize math can solve familiar questions. People who understand math can solve new ones. Most students hate making mistakes. The best math students are obsessed with them. It sounds strange, but every wrong answer contains something valuable, a weakness you didn't know you had. Think about it. If you get a question wrong because of a calculation error, a misunderstood concept, or a careless assumption, that mistake is showing you exactly what needs improvement. But most students look at the correct answer, say, "Oh, I get it now," and move on. A few days later, they make the same mistake again. Top students do something different. They keep an error notebook. Every time they get a question wrong, they write down what happened, why it happened, and how to avoid it next time. Over time, they build a map of their weaknesses. And that's powerful, because the fastest way to improve isn't solving endless new questions. It's making sure the same mistake never beats you twice. Every mistake is feedback. Imagine going to the gym and lifting the same light weight every day. You'd feel comfortable, but would you get stronger? Probably not. Yet that's exactly how many students practice math. They solve questions they already know how to do, get the answer right, and feel productive, but they're not actually growing. The students who become exceptional at math spend time on problems that feel slightly beyond their current level, the kind of questions that make them pause, think, and sometimes fail. At first, it's uncomfortable. You might feel slow or confused, but that's a good sign, because growth doesn't happen when everything is easy. It happens when your brain is forced to find new ways of thinking. The goal isn't to solve every difficult problem immediately. The goal is to regularly challenge yourself with questions that stretch your abilities. Easy problems show what you already know. Hard problems reveal what you're capable of becoming. And that difference changes everything. Here's a simple test. Could you explain the math concept you just learned to a 10-year-old? Most students immediately realize something surprising. Understanding a solution isn't the same as understanding the idea behind it. That's why teaching is such a powerful learning tool. When you try to explain a concept, all the gaps in your understanding suddenly become visible. The parts you thought you knew become harder to describe. The confusing parts stand out immediately, and that's exactly what makes this method so effective. You don't need a classroom or a student. Explain it to a friend, a sibling, or even an empty room. If you can break a complex idea into simple words, you've truly understood it. Top students teach to learn, because the moment you can explain a concept clearly, you've moved beyond memorization and reached real understanding. And that's when math starts becoming much easier. If you can't explain it simply, you probably don't understand it deeply enough yet. Why do two negative numbers multiply to make a positive? Why is pi an endless decimal? Why does probability seem so wrong when we make everyday decisions? Most students never ask these questions. They focus on getting the right answer and moving on. But the students who become truly exceptional at math do something different. They stay curious. Instead of seeing math as a collection of formulas, they see it as a collection of mysteries waiting to be solved. Every concept becomes a question. Every question becomes an opportunity to think deeper. And here's the surprising part. Curiosity makes learning easier. When you're genuinely interested in why something works, you remember it longer, understand it better, and enjoy the process more. That's why the best mathematicians aren't just problem solvers. They're question askers, because the moment you stop asking, learning slows down. But when you stay curious, math stops feeling like a school subject. It becomes a way of understanding the world. So let's put everything together. Most people believe becoming great at math is about talent, that some students are simply born with a special kind of brain. But now you know the truth. The students who reach an elite level don't rely on talent. They rely on habits. They master the fundamentals until the basics feel effortless. They solve problems consistently instead of cramming. They focus on understanding instead of memorizing. They study their mistakes instead of ignoring them. They challenge themselves with harder problems. They teach what they learn. And most importantly, they stay curious. Each habit is powerful, because becoming exceptional at math isn't about solving more questions than everyone else. It's about thinking more deeply about the questions you do solve. So here's your challenge. Pick just one of these habits and start using it today. Today, because every math expert started exactly where you are now. The difference is that they kept going.